You know that moment when your phone rings, you look at the screen, and instead of answering, you just stare at it in silence until the call drops? Or when you cancel plans at the last minute, not because you're busy, but because the simple idea of leaving your room and facing the outside world causes you an almost physical exhaustion? You tell yourself, you'll go next time. You always tell yourself that. But next time comes, and the same heaviness settles in your chest, and you find yourself back in the same quiet corner, alone, relieved, and slightly guilty about the relief. Most people around you assume you're just introverted, maybe a little antisocial, maybe going through something. But here's what almost nobody understands. This pattern of isolation, this gravitational pull toward absolute solitude, is not laziness. It's not social phobia, and it's not depression. If you are an INFJ, the rarest personality type on the planet, your brain is doing something right now that behavioral neuroscience is only beginning to fully explain. And the thing you're trying to hide behind that closed door is far more complex than anyone around you suspects. To understand why INFJs withdraw from the world, you first need to understand what their brain is actually doing while they're in it. During any social interaction, an INFJ's mind is not simply processing the words being spoken to them. It is simultaneously reading facial micro-expressions, tracking vocal tone shifts, absorbing the emotional undercurrent of the room, and building predictive models of what every person around them is actually feeling beneath the surface. Neuroscientists call this predictive processing. Your brain is constantly generating predictions about incoming sensory data, comparing them against reality, and updating its model. In most people, this system runs quietly in the background at a manageable level. But in individuals with dominant introverted intuition, the system runs at an extraordinarily high resolution all day, every day, without an off switch. Think of it as a supercomputer that cannot be shut down. It processes not just information, but intention. Not just language, but the invisible emotional architecture behind every word, every silence, every glance that lasts half a second too long. By the end of a normal day, an INFJ hasn't just interacted with people, they've absorbed them. And the only state where this internal processor can finally stop running in the background is absolute isolation, complete sensory and social withdrawal. Not as a luxury, as a neurological necessity. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology and the architect of the personality framework that would eventually become the 16 types, described introverted intuition as the most inward-facing of all cognitive functions. He wrote that individuals who lead with this function live in a constant dialogue with their unconscious mind, perceiving patterns and symbolic connections that remain invisible to everyone else. But Jung also warned about the cost. A 2014 study published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology measured cortisol levels in individuals with high trait empathy during sustained social interaction. The researchers monitored 38 participants across multiple social conditions, from casual one-on-one conversation to group settings. The results were striking. Highly empathic individuals showed significantly elevated cortisol responses, not just during conflict or stress, but during normal, everyday conversation. Their nervous systems were treating ordinary social contact as a low-grade threat, activating the same hormonal cascade that the body uses to respond to physical danger. A separate study from the University of British Columbia found that introverts with high sensitivity scores showed measurably reduced heart rate variability after just 2 hours of social engagement. a clinical marker of autonomic nervous system fatigue. Their bodies were not just tired. They were physiologically depleted in a way that extroverts in the same conditions simply were not. For an INFJ, this means something profound. Every social interaction isn't just mentally draining, it's physiologically expensive. Their nervous system is paying a biological tax on every conversation, every meeting, every phone call, every party they force themselves to attend. And unlike financial debt, this biological debt compounds silently until the system forces a shutdown. The concept of monk mode, a term that has gained traction in psychology-adjacent spaces, describes a deliberate period of extreme isolation used for deep cognitive recovery and internal recalibration. What most people don't realize is that INFJs aren't choosing monk mode as a productivity hack. Their nervous system is demanding it as a survival mechanism. Now, here's where it starts to feel personal. Because if you're watching this, chances are you already know exactly what I'm about to describe. You treat your own birthday like a regular day. Not because you don't care about it, but because the idea of being the center of attention, even positive attention, makes something inside you contract. When you're hurt or sad, you don't reach out. You disappear. You go completely silent, not to punish anyone, but because you genuinely believe that your pain is too heavy to place on someone else's shoulders. People you barely know confide in you constantly. Strangers tell you things within minutes that they've never told their closest friends. You carry their stories, their fears, their unprocessed grief, and you absorb it all because your brain literally cannot stop itself from doing so. And yet, when you are the one drowning, you suffer in absolute silence. You cannot ask for help, not because you don't want it, but because somewhere deep inside, you are convinced that needing help makes you a burden. There's a term in Jungian psychology for what happens when an INFJ reaches their limit. It's called the door slam. It's not anger. It's not cruelty. It's the moment where the INFJ's internal system, after months or years of absorbing everyone else's weight, finally hits a wall and erects an impenetrable barrier of silence. Not to hurt anyone, to survive. If you've ever watched an INFJ go from warm and deeply caring to completely unreachable overnight, you didn't witness a personality flaw. You witnessed a nervous system shutting down non-essential connections to preserve itself. But the deepest layer of this pattern is one that most INFJ content never touches. And it might be the most important thing in this video. Psychologists studying what they call traumatic intelligence have found a consistent pattern among adults who exhibit extreme empathic withdrawal. Almost without exception, these individuals experienced a childhood where they had to grow up too fast. They were the child who noticed when their parent was upset before anyone else did. The one who learned to read the room at 5 years old because emotional safety depended on it. The one who became the family mediator, the quiet stabilizer, the invisible emotional anchor that held everything together while being far too young to carry that weight. And somewhere in that childhood, they internalized a belief so deep that most of them have never consciously articulated it. The belief that their emotions were too much, that expressing vulnerability or pain would make them a burden, that the safest thing they could do with their own suffering was to hide it completely. The absolute isolation that INFJs crave as adults is not just neurological recovery. It's the only place where they allow themselves to feel the weight they've been carrying. Behind that closed door, in that silent room, they are not hiding from the world. They are hiding their wounds from it because they learned a very long time ago that showing those wounds made people uncomfortable. and an INFJ would rather collapse in private than make someone else feel responsible for their pain. So, if any of this sounds like you, I need you to hear something clearly. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not antisocial or cold or incapable of connection. You are the owner of one of the rarest and most complex minds that human psychology has ever documented. A mind that feels everything at a depth that most people will never experience. And that mind requires a sanctuary, a place of absolute quiet where the supercomputer can finally power down, where the empathic radar can stop scanning, where you can exist without performing, without absorbing, without carrying anyone else's weight for a few precious hours. Your isolation is not your flaw. It is your healing. The next time someone asks you why you disappeared, why you canceled, why you need so much time alone, you don't owe them a clinical explanation, but you can know privately, silently, in that quiet room where you do your best thinking, that what you are doing is one of the most sophisticated acts of psychological self-preservation that exists. If you are watching this video from under your blanket in your safe corner of the world, know this: you are not alone in that silent vigil. Drop a comment saying monk mode so we know how many of us are hiding in silence tonight. And subscribe to this channel because the mysteries inside your mind are only just beginning to be understood. The next video explores what happens when an INFJ finally finds someone who doesn't drain them, and the neuroscience behind it is stranger than you would expect.